Hello everyone. Thanks for coming. Uh, I'm not doing any kind of formal intro, but I figured we were just boss writing, so we're at like 4:17 right now. It's a Sunday. You all want to get to work. You want to build cool stuff. Um, Hello everyone. My name is Vincent. I am here on invitation from Shrey, so thank you for having me. Some of you maybe have I've met like some of you all before, and maybe you all heard the company that I work for called Neo. It's a mentorship community, a VC and accelerator. But what I'm doing today is not talking about any of that, and I wanted to share a bit about a part of my career that has actually been most of my career so far. I'm 28. I graduated college back in 2018. I worked as a PCB designer for about a year, and then I actually spent 4 years as a journalist and a wedding photographer. And the way that I was doing that was this. This is a New York Times article about the work that I was doing back in 2022 that I did between 2019 to 2023, where I lived as a nomad, didn't pay rent anywhere, all around the world, traveled, and I photographed weddings all around the world for free in exchange for living with a couple for about 2 weeks. And I did that with 50 couples in about 15 to 20 different countries all around the world, mostly here in the US, although I did get to travel up to see a decent amount. And I wanted to share a little bit about the story and my personal story, how I came to this, how I ended up working back in tech again. And so I'll just jump right into that. So like many of you all, probably I started off as a nerdy STEM kid. These are some early photos with my family. I remember a lot of summers and weekends were spent in national parks and science museums. I grew up in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma in the center of the country happened, you could drive just about anywhere within 8 hours or so if you really wanted to. We could fly, and all the stops that we would make would always be at science museums and national parks. I have my parents to thank for that. My dad is a doctor, my mom used to be a computer scientist, and they really instilled that in me. I went to a STEM high school, Oklahoma School of Science and Math, probably similar to some of the schools that you may have heard of. Like, Illinois has one, North Carolina has a similar school. Took an electronics class when I was a senior and absolutely loved it. And so I went into college knowing that I was going to do electrical engineering. This is me at Princeton on the very first day, extremely confused and honestly pretty scared. I got to college and I was very, very insecure. I'd grown up in Oklahoma, and I was surrounded by peers who came from all around the world and had done things at such incredible international and national achievement that I really didn't know how to hold myself against them, and I didn't feel confident around them. And it meant that I had a freshman year that was honestly pretty lonely. I didn't have friends. I did have walking mates and other people that college naturally will put you around. But there's so many people that I felt so distant to that I really, really did want to connect with all the time that I just never got the chance to, in part because I was psyching myself out. Honestly, no one was judging me. No one was thinking, who is this kid from Oklahoma? But I was telling myself that, and it was a self-reinforcing narrative. And I ended up spending a summer back at home after my freshman year, not doing anything related to engineering, not doing anything related to academics. I just spent the summer at home trying fun things for the sake of them being fun and trying to do stuff just because it gave me joy. And I think that for me, that summer ended up being one of the most transformative because I removed the whole pressure of having to do something, build something, be someone for other people, and simply embraced wanting to do those things just for myself. One of the big things that I did was sniffing photography. These are my very first photos, basically. This is still at Princeton. I remember it was finals week, my spring semester, which is not a great time to get a new camera, but I was running all around campus photographing. Pretty amateur overall, right? Nothing too special. It's literally like the most cliche thing that you could do is taking a photo of a bike. But I loved it. It was a lot of fun. I spent the rest of the summer doing a bunch of other hobbies as well. I cooked. My parents are Taiwanese, so they taught me how to cook a bunch of food like Taiwanese noodle soup. Then I took photos of that. I went to visit family one time in San Francisco. Your iPhones could probably take a better photo than this at this point, but at that point, this was how I stayed present in the world and how I engaged with the world. And photography was just that. It wasn't anything else. It wasn't anything more. Over time, though, it did become more because I went back to school for my sophomore year, and I found that in doing portraits in particular, the way that almost everybody on a college campus needed a photo of themselves at some point meant that I got the chance to interact with just about everybody on campus. And a lot of these same people were the people that I had felt so distant to my first year that now I was standing literally 10 feet away from them and photographing them. And almost all of these portraits, funnily enough, are from there. Obviously, like there's one of Obama and something else that's out at Princeton. That was at the White House. But most of these are from my friends at school. And what was so special about it was that these were people who were not just clients. They were just my friends, or they were friends of friends, or they were friends to be. There would be people that I would see again and again and again across campus. And I think that was really special. There were a lot of really great memories from that time. These were some of the coolest ones. I was in the pool. I got a waterproof case and some pretty sick shots that came out of that. Uh, Let me get my slide a little bit so I can see. I got exposed to a lot of the communities that I otherwise wouldn't have. I never played sports growing up. I never went to any of the football games, but now I got a reason to because I was taking photos for the newspaper in school. And this feeling of how photography gave me something really special to connect with other people on, not as the aesthetics themselves, but simply as the medium for connection, is something that really stuck with me. I started to photograph weddings, just freelance. So these are screenshots from my website. You can search my name if you want to see any of the photos yourself. But I started photographing weddings and noticed that there was the same kind of connection that I had with my peers in school. But what could come of it was that it could be everybody. It didn't have to just be people at college. It could be people all around the country and all around the world. And this didn't necessarily turn into any specific idea yet during college, but the germination of it really stuck. That it was this idea that I could connect with anybody just because I had a camera. And if I could offer to photograph their wedding, maybe there would be some way that I could actually connect with them as a whole. When I was a senior, I was doing electrical engineering alongside all of this. And my first job out of college was actually as a PCB designer. This is like my old company's Instagram post welcoming me. Funnily enough, I'm like just a couple months later because they were a couple months late in posting it. I did enjoy electrical engineering. I did enjoy building. I enjoyed doing things with my hands, but I was so separated at this point from people and their stories that I had spent so much of my college career really engaging with that once I didn't have that anymore in the form of I was working full time now as an engineer, it became really obvious to me that this wasn't going to be tenable. I wasn't going to become an incredible engineer in the future. I didn't want this life for another 20, 30, 40 years. And I realized this relatively quickly, which on the downside of that was, crap, I just spent 4 years getting a great engineering degree. What am I doing now? Am I just going to throw this all away? But the upside is it's better to do that early rather than later. And for me, I was really, really interested in following the pull of the work that I was really drawn to back in college, which frankly was not engineering. I realized that very quickly, and was storytelling and people. And so around this time is when I started thinking about this idea again of connecting with people through photography and how I might be able to expand that beyond just college and actually across the entire country and across the entire world. And weddings were the way that was going to do that. And so I put up a website, and this is like a screenshot from the very first version of it. It's different now if you go to portraitofayouncouple.com. That was the name of the project. But my tagline was, I'm photographing weddings for free in exchange for a place to sleep, food to eat, and a story to tell. And I had never seen anybody do anything like this necessarily, but I had a hunch and enough experience with photography and with connecting with people that I had a sense that this might work. And I didn't need it to scale. I didn't need it to blow up on the internet. I didn't need for every single couple of underworld to do this. It was following something just because I had the pull towards it and seeing where it led. And where it led was tons and tons of different people and different stories. Really, really diverse backgrounds, really, really interesting people. I feel so lucky to have spent so much of my young life. I was 23 to 27. I'm 28 now, so this actually wasn't very long ago that I put this on pause. But I spent basically most of my 20s in other people's lives and learning about their worlds. And you can see there's a lot of different kinds of story that they're all tied together, sure, with the idea of a wedding, but everything else beyond that is totally different. I became close friends with a lot of people. You'll see me, I had a very clear uniform, which I don't know why is Hawaiian, for wearing for a wedding. But I love all these people. I don't keep in touch with them on a daily basis necessarily, but we've spent a really core part of life together. And for me, that has shaped everything else that I've done in the future. It hasn't been too much longer, but to give the quick summary of how I ended up winding back in tech, I had met my boss, who's the founder and CEO of Neo, Abu Partobi, back when I was a senior at college. And he at the time was recruiting for this college program before there was anything about Neo on the internet. There were
was no class of native scholars. There was nothing other than Ali and his reputation as a really, really credible investor in the Valley. And I met with him, and he was looking for these hyper technical future founders. And he was sharing the story with me of what he wanted to build. And I just responded to him immediately within the first 5 to 10 minutes. I am not the person that you're looking for. And I don't think I was being unconfident. I don't think I was being insecure. I think I was just being honest with myself about what I knew I spent my time on and who I knew I was. And we ended up spending the rest of the conversation talking about photography and community building and my time at Princeton and his story and his upbringing, escaping Iran during the revolution, and having his own journey to being a software engineer and being a founder and exiting and then being a mentor over decades. And it was just such a wonderful conversation that, again, didn't have to necessarily lead anywhere. I think that's been the theme of a lot of my life, is not overthinking if the exact thing that you're doing right now, if you enjoy doing it and if you think it feels right, of have it to somehow project out 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future, because that is, who knows exactly where it will lead. But if you can be present and you can enjoy that moment and you can follow those little feelings over and over and over again, it's like over time, these tiny little diversions in your path will like lead to somewhere that you really want. And so he followed my project. He followed the updates that I would send out as I was traveling all around the world. And eventually I had moved to San Francisco to be close to a lot of my community. I did graduate engineering, so most of my friends went in San Francisco. And he reached out and he was like, I think you would really enjoy doing this work now, where you get to travel around the country, you get to meet students, you get to share your story and then learn about theirs. And he's absolutely been right. It's been about a year and a half. I met hundreds of people across the country. I don't touch investing. I don't touch anything on the accelerator side. And for me, that is actually a really big joy. Because I love storytelling fundamentally. And this is true of any occupation and any job. So much of what will allow you to succeed, it is the story that you craft. And so even if it doesn't feel like it's directly connected, I've found that being able to be very stubborn about merging these very disparate interests that I have in engineering and journalism and photography, that over time that has meant that I now get to have a career and get to have a life where I don't have to separate any of those things, which I obviously feel very lucky for, but also was some amount of my own stubbornness over the years. So if you happen to want to read more or learn more, you would go to portraitofayouncouple.com, and for every one of the couples that you saw, there is a long story about them, and you can see a little bit more about the kinds of people that I stay with, and the ideas that I was having through this time. So yeah, that's my story. Thanks for listening. I'm a little bit headed. All right. I don't know if it's like Q&A or something else, but
Does anyone have a question? Yeah. So I actually have a friend who decided to take a gap year this year, and he just kind of wanted to explore like the world and go to Asia. But he actually like cut it short and came back after like half a semester, and like he described it as like there's like this immense feeling of like longing to come home. And how do you like deal with like, that aspect of like travel?
yeah, it's a really astute question. Shrey and I were just talking about this. You were a month away in Europe and traveling all around. Um, so the timing of these 4 years that I spent on the road was between 2019 and 2023. And obviously right in the middle of that is a big fat thing called pandemic. Um, Ironically enough, so obviously the pandemic like forced most of us to be confined into our homes and into one space and without the ability to travel. In my case, was it did do that for the first couple months, but weddings were one of the few things, and maybe some of you all saw this, that during the pandemic there were a lot of people still holding Zoom weddings. There were still a lot of people like who felt that the wedding was something that was special enough to take the risk that amidst all the uncertainty of the world, that they wanted to have a certainty if they could be married. And most of the time when they had that, they still wanted a photographer for it. So I still had the opportunity to be able to travel. And I was trying to be as safe as I could. I was driving everywhere at the time. I had everything packed into my car. I was not taking flights. I was testing every single week. That was a little pain in the ass because just tests were not easy to find at that point. But the reason that relates to this idea of community for me was that most of my community was stuck inside. There wasn't for me at that point actually a feeling of FOMO, which was a weird thing to say, whereas like, all my friends were kind of like at home doing their Zoom chats and I was still the one who was still being people and get it to be a community. And so to be honest, like I don't like seeing things as like, oh, because I got to do something more than my community, therefore it was like fine. But that was actually in large part the reason why I think it was okay. Actually, for the first 2 years. And the reason that I know that is that the second 2 years, it suddenly internally felt much more difficult, where in 2022, 2023 or so, once the world started opening back up, I would see my friends post, have parties, hanging out, and I would see myself in those photos and know that if I were with them, I would have been in those photos. And that started to weigh on me over time. Um, I did the specific example, of what my life was like for those 4 years is that for 4 years I didn't take any round trip flights. Everything was one way. And what that represented mentally was that I think there was nothing that was ever pulling me back and drawing me back. And that means I was very free. But over time, that also meant that I wasn't really tethered to a community. I wasn't tethered to a specific person. And I don't think that's healthy in the long term. I think it actually is really important to have a community that you want to feel drawn back to. And so part of the reason that I didn't do this for another 4 years after doing it for 4 years was because I did want that sense of community again. I live in San Francisco nowadays. I have wonderful friends, wonderful housemates that I get to live with, group living. And I really did want that. And so I guess to sort of answer your question is like, I certainly wasn't immune to it, but some of the circumstances around me helped. And some amount of my own, I think maybe my nature, where I am someone that I tend to meet people in one-off 1 to 2 hour settings where we just get to connect really deeply. And I know that that might not be something that extends into regular conversation in the future. And I think that's okay. With these couples, it was more than an hour, it was maybe a week or two. But for most of them, I haven't seen them again since then. And yet, I don't think that when you're at college, so much of friendship is dictated by frequency, by how often you see someone. And after graduation, you'll find this very quickly when you all are seniors and leaving school and going off into the world at different places. But you have to define friendship in different ways at that point, because you're not going to see your closest friends the most often. You're likely going to see coworkers or random people in your city most often. And so how do you redefine that? And for me, I've redefined it as long as we have had a chance to be able to share time together where we have been able to build a sense of trust, we might not know each other fully. It's not about like knowing all the logistics or the exact story of someone's life, but this sense of trust that decays much more slowly than the actual sense of, do I know exactly everything that is going on in this person's life? And so I think for me, that is my nature, is that I've been kind of comfortable with that feeling of, I don't know exactly what's going on in my friend's life, but that doesn't mean that we're less close. And so that also helped.
Yeah. What was the most memorable wedding that you could want photographs?
Ooh. There's two that come to mind. One was memorable for reasons of the environment. So there was a couple. I wonder, I said a photo here, but there was a couple who lived in rural Alaska, and they had bought this 3-acre by 3-acre plot of land that was completely undeveloped. It was near a road, so they did have electricity that ran along the road, but the actual land itself was just covered in trees. And when I went to visit them, they had just cleared out the first little, maybe, I don't know, 400, 500 square feet of space in order to take a shipping container and then just drop it down, because they were going to take a shipping container and make it at their home. I wish I had these photos. They're kind of nuts. And for me, I think the environment was really special because they were a perfect couple. I think a lot of people in Alaska are there because they don't really necessarily fit in a lot of other places. One of them had grown up there. The other one moved there from upstate New York. And they very intentionally wanted to build a life there. And this plot of land to me represented almost like a physical version of what it means to love someone and commit a life to someone, because everything they wanted to do in their life, they would have to build themselves. They had to put work into it. They had to put money into it, tears, blood, sweat. And if they didn't do that, none of it would happen. They didn't have anybody else that was going to do it for them. And I think that in life, marriage, love, relationships, it's true over time as well, that you want it to grow, you want it to change, you want it to be better. Like, you need to put in that work. It isn't going to happen passively. Alaska is also just a really beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to go and just road trip there, I think it's absolutely stunning. I grew up in Oklahoma, but I did go to the like national parks. And I remember when I was driving around growing up, and then also when I was driving for my own project around the country, there was such a marked difference in the part of the East Coast. I'll just keep this up. I'll try to keep this up. So there's something on screen. There was such a marked difference between driving in the eastern half of the country and the western half, where the eastern half is mostly trees. And so the view that you actually see when you're driving everywhere tends to be actually more similar to different, which to me meant that there was a sense that time was sort of not passing because your view is just ever the same. Like if you've ever driven from here, maybe to, I don't know, like Florida or to like Ohio or somewhere else, like the view is mostly the same. There's nothing in the far distance that gets closer or anything. That's very different from on the West Coast where you see the mountains in the background, and over the course of an hour, they get closer and closer and closer, and pretty soon you're in them. And there's this sense of scale and there's sense of this passage of time, and it was just gorgeous. And Alaska was like that. So that was really memorable, I think, because of the environment and how closely that linked to actually the couple's story. I think another one that was memorable was that probably the one that I got the most like what kind of responses was a couple that had a 40-year age out. And I ended up not publishing their story for a number of reasons. I always gave couples permission to say that they didn't want their story public, and I would share it with them and they could share it with their friends and family behind like a password protected site. But I wanted to do that so that people would frankly feel comfortable sharing anything with me. And I found it to be really interesting because for me, it forced open a lot of questions about why is the reaction that I had and why is the reaction that other people have to the initial tagline of this couple has a 40-year age gap. So almost always negative. And when it wasn't negative, what was the reason for that? What were people's like preconceived notions about relationships, about power? I think the most one example of why I think it's worth interrogating that is that you go through different parts of history and you can find different things that we now accept as being totally fine, that at one point, if you told other people about this kind of relationship, they would have had basically the same response: same sex, interracial, everything else. What I found interesting, so the groom was black and he was the one who was a bit older, and the bride was white, then a bit younger. And for him, he had grown up in Charlottesville and Jim Crow segregation. And to him, it was actually much, much crazier that he was marrying someone who was white and the fact that he was marrying someone so young. And I just found that, like, you don't have to agree with that. And that was sort of the point, is that it was fine that they had thought so much about their own relationship and their own life. And who was I to judge without knowing anything else about their life, without knowing exactly what the circumstances of how they met each other were, about the circumstances of their relationship in the future. And as a result, it just like forced me to sit down and take a step back and ask these questions. And they were really, really open about answering them, which is really special. I mean, that's a bigger age gap than I have ever seen in any other relationship. And certainly one of the biggest that they have ever seen as well amongst all the communities of other age gap relationships that they've seen. So that's probably one of the most like, emotionally and intellectually interesting ones as well. So, okay. One more.
Like, why did you decide to continue with engineering? Like, at what point did, like, I guess photography start?
Like making a bigger difference in your life than your actual schoolwork did, or if it ever did.
Yeah, the honest answer is that when I was a senior, so my freshman year summer, I didn't do anything related to internships. My sophomore and junior year, I did do very explicitly like PCB design / hardware internships. At small places, it was at like little small startups. It wasn't anything like a big tech company or big brand names. I enjoyed that. And part of the reason that I wanted to at least do engineering for a year was to see what it would be like to work as an engineer for a year, knowing that I only had a little trial taste of it in the form of internships. To be clear, I actually didn't dislike engineering. I actually really liked it a lot. But I think for me, what was the difference was that photography, and most importantly, the way that it allowed me to connect with people, it's like engineering was maybe like like a 7 in terms of like fulfillment, and then all this other work felt like it was like a 9.9. And during school, it was easy enough to mask the fact that engineering was not even close to being a 10. Maybe it honestly was probably closer to like a 5 rather than a sappy. Maybe like hat was interesting to me, but it wasn't like I hate this with all my heart. But during school, it's easy enough to mask it because all these things were happening alongside each other. It was easy enough to say like, oh, I have a fulfilling life as a whole because I have all these parts that are in different ways fulfilling, but none of which I dislike. And now maybe let me try working full time and seeing if that 5 can become something that is higher. And I just really quickly found out that it wasn't. I think if I If there's something in my nature that has helped me in all of this, it's probably that I have very little tolerance for I have very little tolerance for doing things just because they like pay the dues. Meaning like I wasn't about to be like a junior engineer for a while just to be able to climb to like the senior rank. Not that I wanted that. I wasn't. I don't find that much either personal fulfillment from external validation. I really would rather have internal conviction. There's this, I think, inverse correlation between the two actually that is important to like recognize in yourself, which is that the more internal conviction you have, the less external validation you will need for any given thing. And the opposite is true as well. If you have very little internal conviction about any idea, whether it's a relationship or a job prospect or your career, you will seek out external validations and external markers, which may come in the form of money and they come in the form of approval from your parents or your friends or your communities. And it's important to recognize, are you in a place for any given decision where you are drawn more towards the external validation? And I think this happens in particular a lot in college campuses, obviously because it's hard to develop internal conviction. Like you haven't worked in the world or lived in the world outside of your own community growing up, and then maybe this college community. So this is not to say that you should be ashamed for not having that kind of internal conviction, but it is to recognize that you will always be susceptible to that sort of inverse correlation. And for me, like I was just almost like I think I had felt this before I even was able to define it, that I just did not want to be susceptible to purely external conviction. I have like external validation. I wanted to have some sense of internal conviction. And I knew that like I couldn't switch jobs and just be paid for and I'd be fine. I couldn't like do a really great project at work and then someone would be like, oh, you did great. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, that like propels me for the next like 4 to 6 months until like the next like hit of external validation. And so I had a very quick feedback loop between I don't actually want to do this internally. And like I've tried it now for a couple months. Like it's clearly not necessarily, even if it gets quote unquote better, it's like not getting better in ways that will like change that internal sense of do I want to do this? And then was able to quickly like figure out, okay, what the heck do I do instead? And that's thankfully where it would have been a lot more difficult, frankly, to like obviously to jump into I am going to be a nomad and be a wedding photographer if I hadn't at that point already been doing some freelance work on the side, like side projects and things on the weekends and moonlighting, and trying a bunch of stuff. That summer that I shared before was like my summer of trying a bunch of things, and I think it gave me a much better sense of all the possible options of things that I might enjoy. And then I was able to narrow in on like, okay, photography, and that was really, really important for me for the next couple of years. And so at the point when I was going to leave engineering specifically, it no longer felt like it was nearly as scary because I had some time to be able to build up the confidence and again, this sense of internal conviction for this new route that I was going to take, even if I didn't have, in that point, really any external validation that this would work. Like I had never seen anybody photograph weddings in this way. I'd never seen anybody describe things in this way. But even like 6 years ago when I first started this, I probably could have told you actually in very similar words why I was doing it. And that was more than enough to make up for the lack of kind of external markers to tell me that this is something that will work. All right. Oh, I guess for the sake of time, I'm happy to keep on chatting and everything, but I know that you all have other preparing, so thank you.
Cool.
All right, meet up.